Good morning, class. Today we're going to be going over zero trust networks. My name is Alexander Sanchez, and the people presenting with us today is going to be Austin Bessong, Jessica Powley, and Josh Bauer.
For the outline of our project, we're going to be going over the basics of the Zero Trust Network model, a more detailed description of how it functions in the 5-layer internet model, how it is being implemented in networks today, whether or not it affects the reliability of the network, and the Zero Trust Network model compared to the perimeter defense model.
So for the who, what, when, and why, it's just going to go over the basics of how it was created. John Kinkerbad created the Zero Trust Network model in 2009 when he was the vice president and principal analyst at Forrester Research. In his time at Forrester Research, John had realized that the traditional security models are flawed. John believed that these security models were outdated because they still operated on the assumption that everything in the network should be trusted. This means that if a user's identity is compromised, the network may not detect the potential problems until it's too late. This caused John to create a new security model based on different core principles. Never trust, always verify. This principle is helpful because it helps mitigate the damage malicious insiders and bad actors can do. What this looks like. Let's say a device is trying to connect an organization's network. Before that device will able to be connected to any IP addresses or machines or etc., all the network until the network verifies the identity with the multi-factor identification, the IP address will not be able to connect. This verification will also be needed to access further amounts of data that you aren't already connected to.
And then when you're considering the zero trust model, it's also important to consider the security model that is most popularly used now, which is known as the perimeter defense model. The traditional perimeter model for security we currently have relies on firewalls to separate the trusted resources from the untrusted resources. The DMZ, or demilitarized zone, allows external resources to be accessed without the private network connecting directly to the internet. Additionally, firewalls created from NAT can make clients connect to the router without using their private IPs. Both DMZs and NAT firewalls allow different ways to establish buffers between the internet and private networks in order to make them more secure. This is all utilized by the model in order to prevent attacks to the internal systems from the internet, which can partially be done by protecting the private IP. All of this revolves around the idea that trust must be established before there can be access to the private networks.
For the trust to be established before the connection is made, the Zero Trust Network would have to be implemented into the session layer of the 7-layer internet model. The session layer is actually incorporated into the application layer when discussing the 5-layer internet model that we learned about in class. In the session layer, the Zero Trust Network would use signaling to establish authentication and authorization prior to the initial connecting to create a way for enterprises to control the network security and decide on whether it's safe to trust the network based on the user, location, and data. This prevents connections from occurring without the proper amount of understanding of a user, their location, and data, also preventing too much trust at the establishment of the communication.
And with an understanding of both zero trust security and the perimeter defense model now, it would be important to know what would be replaced in the popularly used model while transitioning to zero trust. The most significant change would easily be the overall idea of how the models view trust. Problems can occur if an attacker is able to bypass the perimeter model's firewalls. Therefore, zero trust would automatically assume that the network is always hostile and that there are always internal and external threats. The use of IP addresses would also change. Zero Trust recommends encryption as a way to verify identity. Doing so would allow the model to disregard IP addresses and in the process, VPNs would also be unnecessary for security reasons. Overall, Zero Trust is designed to be an alternative to the common perimeter model with the intention to establish trusted connections more thoroughly.
So the best way to implement zero trust. As like with many things, the easiest way to implement zero trust network architecture would be outsourcing it from organizations that already implement it. Example of this could be Duo Security, which Penn State uses, Beyond Corp, which Google uses, Perimeter 81, and a few dozen extras. The downside to this will be cost for that any organization willing that wants to run it. Another option is creating the architecture yourself. This option is viable as long as you follow the tenets of zero trust. Always never trust, always verify. But this also requires an in-depth knowledge of programming, which I don't have, so I won't go further.
So before we implement our new defense model, we should definitely take a look at how it's like how reliable it is compared to the other one we have right now. Not to mention the performance improvement that we expect to adopt. One large difference employees are experiencing today is a lot of services like Office 365, Salesforce, and the Google Office suite are now available in the cloud. Now, before this transition, an employee would need to access an internal network with the perimeter using either a VPN, which means connected to a VPN server, using some sort of authentication method like username and password, or a combination of the two. Once this user is connected to this virtual network that allows them to access anything permissible, there is no more authentication that is required, and the user is able to move around the network as they please. It's a single door to walk through. Now here we already see where the zero trust method is more reliable than a virtual network, because instead of an employee gaining access to the entire internal network via VPN, instead the user will be redirected to what's called a reverse proxy, which can be defined as a sort of gateway that a server places between itself and the user that is trying to gain access to the server. With our zero trust model, the reverse proxy will redirect the user to some sort of single sign-on scheme, and if the verification is successful, it will redirect you not to the internal network itself, but one of the many internal applications in the network instead. This process would also repeat if you needed to access another application on the internal network, and it will repeat. And as I said earlier about cloud applications being a more viable option today, that protocol occurs when a user wants to gain access to any cloud-based service. You're redirected through the reverse proxy and SSO, asked to verify, and move to the service you requested. As you can see, there's not just one door anymore. You are constantly being verified, not just once. Now, all of this sounds fantastic, but you also have to remember that this model does require slightly more upkeep than the standard VPN, because things like user IDs and computer IDs expire, and those are going to be used to authenticate you and your device. So it definitely depends on the system admins to maintain the system, and that's what makes it so reliable.
Organizations and companies that use zero trust already or are planning to switch. So I'm going to start with the big one, Google. Google has been building their own zero trust network in response to an advanced persistent threat attack in 2009. So originally it was only used for the employees in the company, but it actually grew until it became an organization that split off from Google, and Google still uses it in a loose connection type of way. Now, if you want to actually use Beyond Corp's uh, zero trust architecture, you just need to contact them and they would give it to you for a price. Another organization that uses it is actually PSU. Since last May, we now use Duo Security, or Duo Mobile, as many of you guys will know it, to access Canvas, LionPath, and I'm pretty sure the email too. And that, as we might not have realized it at the time, but that's actually zero trust security. And the last organization is Sysdeg Inc. And that company is a software company based in San Francisco that runs SaaS platforms, the most notable being Kubernetes, a security software. They are an organization that didn't implement Zero Trust Network from a third party. They actually created it inside and have now implemented it recently in December of 2020.
So in conclusion, zero trust network architecture is becoming increasingly more common with each passing year. In North America alone, where it has been implemented in most businesses, 60% of large companies report either already having zero trust or plan to switch it. And that's pretty much the whole idea of this. It's basically, because of COVID-19, everyone's moving home. Businesses are starting to see the value of no perimeter, because we're not all in the same place anymore. And also all of our services aren't accessible in one place anymore. We're using things like Office 365, Google's Office Suite, and it just makes a lot of sense to not put all of our valuable information in one place anymore. So thank you for listening to the presentation. If you have any questions, email any of us and we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.